So the second one, we have what we call this one separation of variables. Separation of variables. So we're gonna get straight to the point. What do we need to know? We need to know the standard form. Standard form and the method. We need to know the standard form and the method. So with separation of variable, our standard form is given by dy over dx. Note that we are using variable x and y for teaching purposes. You can get other variables. For example, you can get the v over the t. You can get something else, but for the sake of teaching, we are actually using y and x. So let's continue. I was still explaining that the standard form of a separation of variables, you need to know this by heart. Standard form is the y over the x, which is given by f of xy, which is equals to, it can be p of x, which is being multiplied by q of y. So what exactly does this guys represent? You have your standard form as dy over dx, which is equals to f of xy. F of xy, this simply means we're dealing with a function of two variables. As we can see from the notation, that we'll be dealing with x and y. So basically we'll be solving for x and y in the same condition, in the same equation. And our function, it can either be a product of x and y, or it can be a quotient or a division of two functions. So let's quickly look at an example. So same applies with direct integration. The coefficient of separation of variable, it must always be 1. Here we must have our coefficient of dy over the x as 1. Let's quickly look at an example. Let's say you have dy over dx, which is equals to what? Let's just say xy. Ne? Okay, before we solve this, I think I need to talk about the method. The method, how do you solve this? The method, we need to talk about the method. Okay, the method with separation of variable, the method, you are going to separate the variables, separate the variables. What does this actually mean? It means that you must have your y on your left and your x on your right. You must have your y on your left and your x on your right. And then after separating the variables, what do? You integrate both sides. You integrate both sides. And then the question can either ask you to leave your answer in explicit or implicit form. If they say leave your answer in explicit form, it means you must leave your answer as y is equals to something. It means you'll take whatever that you'll be having on your left hand side and transpose it to your right hand side. So just a quick recap. We have separation of variables. The standard form for separation of variables given by dy over the x, which is equals to f of xy, which is equals to p of x multiplied by q of y. So I mentioned, this is very important. If you have anything in front of dy over the x, the standard form, you must get rid of these guys before you try to solve. And another thing, you are working with a function of two variables, meaning that you will be having x and y in the same equation, right? And lastly, the last point is that our function on our right hand side, it can be a product of x and y, or it can be a division of two functions. So let's quickly try to look at how we can solve separation of variable. So for example, we have dy over the x. What's going on? Slide. Let me quickly add another slide. So we have dy over the x, dy over the x, which is equals to xy, and we have dy over the x, which is equals to xy. Ne? Remember, our standard form is given by dy over the x is equals to p of x multiplied by q of y. And I quickly mentioned that our right hand side, it can be a multiplication or a division of two functions. And the method, I said, I said, what do? You separate the variables, and then the next thing, you integrate both sides, Okay, let's try to put this in practice. We've been talking about theory, now it's enough. Let's put this in practice. So you have a equation as dy over the x is equals to xy. So we need to solve this using separation of variable. What is the first step? You're going to interchange these guys here. You're going to interchange dx and y, meaning that you will end up with what? You will end up with dy over y is equals to x dx. You separated the variables, meaning what, you have your y's on one side. You see, we have our y's on one side and we have our x on one side. After that, what do you do next? You integrate both sides. Simple like that. You integrate both sides. If you integrate the integral of 1 over x dx is equals to ln x, and you can see that in this case we have the integral of 1 over y dy. It means that our answer is what? Ln of y is equals to x squared all over 2 plus c. So this is your final answer. So let's quickly go to the next one. You see, this problem was when we have product of two functions. Let's go to the other problem where we are actually having quotient of two functions. We're still going to apply the same principle, meaning that the first thing first that we are going to do here, we are going to separate the variables. After separating the variables, we are going to integrate both sides. So let's look, how do we separate the variables here? We have dy over the x, which is equals to x all over y. How can we separate the variables? Remember, when we separate the variables, we need to have y on one side and x. We need to have y on our left hand side, and x on our right hand side. So how can we do that? We can just easily cross multiply. If we cross multiply here, we're gonna end up with what? We're gonna end up with y dy, which is equals to x dx. We have separated the variables. We're done with this part. We have separated the variables. Now we move to the next point. We integrate both sides. We're going to integrate both sides. And then after integrating both sides, we're going to end up with y squared all over 2, which is equals to x squared all over 2 plus c. This is very important. When you're integrating both sides, you don't add plus c on both sides. You don't do y squared over 2 plus c and then x squared over 2 plus c. You only add this c once. So this is how you can easily solve using separation of variable and direct integration. If you have any question or you are confused about anything, just leave the comment below and I will get back to you as soon as possible.